Hello, Wiley. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Wyatt. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we're here today to talk about your paper.
Yes, this is my paper. I titled it Rule of the Strongest.
What was this paper written for?
I wrote this paper as an assignment for my History 355 class, which is a study of German 19th century history.
Very interesting. And what is your paper about?
I wrote Rule of the Strongest to examine how militaries, and particularly the Prussian military, influenced politics in the mid to late 19th century.
I imagine the title has some significance related to the subject matter?
Yes, it really does. I believe the title really serves to underline the importance of the military and how influential it was at the time.
Armies and politics, never a dull moment. And what argument are you trying to make here?
As I conducted my research, I came to realize that the military was not only inseparable from politics, but it exerted considerable pressure on politicians and leaders at the time. Therefore, I decided to put forward the argument that the military, again primarily the Prussian military, played a decisive role in determining how and when German unification would take place.
I see. You chose to support your argument with these 3 points. What are these points and why did you use them?
The supporting points of my argument are the internal, social, and external politics that the military influences. I decided on these points because I felt that together they encompass essentially all of society. Of course, this further supports the argument, the fact that the armies of the day had such a wide grasp.
Your period of focus is the mid to late 19th century. Why is that?
My initial topic had actually intended to discuss the entire 19th century. But after listening to some advice from Professor Gosson, I came to realize that the entire century would just be too broad for the scope of this paper.
3,500 words are surprisingly short when you had a lot to say.
Yeah, exactly. I imagine some will say that my time period is still too broad, but I felt that any shorter period would miss out on the context at hand. As for the mid to late century in particular, I chose this because I felt that the unification of Germany in 1871 was one of the single most important events in 19th century Europe, and I was so intrigued by it. Of course, military history is one of my primary studies, so I wanted to see how the two were connected.
In your section on internal politics, you mentioned an interesting point in regards to Otto von Bismarck. You suggest that perhaps his loyalty to the king was spurred on by pressure from the military. How did you come to this conclusion?
Well, it is far from a conclusion. I don't have the expertise on the topic to make a concrete argument. And of course, we can't exactly ask Bismarck how he felt. Regardless, I felt that this is one of my strongest points of the paper. After a number of readings, it seemed as though Bismarck had made some early proposals for bills that were shot down. He was working with the apparatus of Parliament, which the military, and consequently the king, did not trust. I discussed this connection in my paper. In due time, Bismarck begins to work with the king and gains more power. Knowing the nature of Bismarck as an opportunist, I believe that the military leaders in Prussia at the time were able to push Bismarck in a direction that would support their interests by making his only option for advancement to be through their institutions, namely the royalty. Whether or not this was their intention is another question as well.
That sounds like it could be a paper of its own.
Yeah, it will. I'll definitely be keeping it in mind for the future.
I think your section on external politics is the most convincing. What about you?
Well, as I said in the section on wars, it is definitely the most blatant example. I don't think there is any question that Prussia's abilities to throw its weight around was ultimately the deciding factor in the question of German unification. The first 2 points really serve to explain how Prussia managed to get to this point in the first place. But at the end of the day, Prussia's ability to knock out both Austria and France in relatively short wars was the climax of the period. Afterwards, there really wasn't any opponent that was capable and willing to halt Prussia's plans.
You made some great points, Wiley. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Wiley's paper, Rule of the Strongest, was written in March of 2018.